Hello students, welcome to PG Patashala. I am K. Muralidhar. I am presently a J.C. Bose National Fellow and an honorary professor in a sister institution what is called as South Asian University in New Delhi, Chanakyapuri. Today we are going to discuss about a module called Ecological Context of Living. What are the objectives of this module? At the objectives that are listed here are, at the end of this lesson, one would be able to appreciate the scope of ecological studies, understand the definition of ecological terms, become aware of the habitat destruction caused by anthropogenic activities, respect the work of restoration ecologists, understand the true spirit of saying live and let live. Ecology is a subject that tries to understand how diverse organisms live together in this world. To the best of our knowledge, Earth is the only place in the universe which has supported carbon-based life. The biosphere is a vast, colorful and full of life forms and living patterns. We share this planet with billions of other organisms. Even a single human body is not alone. Each of us have 10 to the power of 14 human cells or number of cells in the human body, but we also harbor 10 to the power of 21 microbial cells, mostly in our gut. That tells you that no organism is alone in this universe, and therefore by nature all living organisms are gregarious in nature, and therefore we say live always in communities, help each other, and then so that the whole race, the whole community can survive. Danger to survival of any single species will ultimately indirectly affect survival of human being. Hence, we should learn from this lesson that it is important to respect every and each form of life on this earth. Basically talks in the context of what do ecologists study. One of the things they will study is survival rate in a given population over a period of time. Some raw data is indicated here, which are given in numbers, and how these are mathematically computed and then reduced to graphs. And then you notice here that for most of the population, this is given in the form of survival rates, and this differs from population to population based on the actual collected data. Talks about another parameter, that is fecundity, and how this is measured in populations over a period of time, and the data is given as a function of age, and this is also represented in a graphical form below, and this simply says how many progeny are there and how many of them were produced at what age, and the average offspring per individual alive at a given age as a percentage or as a fraction of the previous. All this data is reduced to in the form of figure, and that indicates that fecundity increases and then falls over a period of time depending on the age. Is a result of a study that ecologists often do as to the relation of density of population, how it affects fecundity. These are indicated, and in general we learn in these figures, and in general we learn that as the density increases, the fecundity falls. That's what is indicated in this. And the data is represented in different forms in these three figures. However, what is its ecological significance? In many organisms, depending on the density, the number of offspring, that is, and in case of plants, say seeds, can affect. If it is increasing, it means the plant produces more seeds as density increases, whereas in the other cases it may fall, and these are indicated in the three figures. Essentially, it tells about another aspect that ecologists study, and this is what we call as growth curves. How do different organisms grow, and how does this indicate in the form of a figure when you plot growth in terms of number, cell number versus time. Here is an example for a typical bacterial growth, and as you notice from this curve, it has got arbitrarily, we can see three stages. In the lower end, you see what is known as lag phase or lag period. Then in the middle, you notice what is called as log phase or exponential phase. And later, you notice something which is labeled as stationary phase, and followed by what is called death phase. So if you take a typical bacterium and inoculate and grow it in a given limited medium, you notice or you get this kind of a bacterial growth curve. However, the middle portion, which is called the exponential phase, one can continue to be in that phase if you replenish the medium with fresh medium. Then you get what is called as a J-shaped curve. Extends this same growth curve data and shows how to plot this and derive more information or understanding. You can linearize this growth curve if you plot logarithms versus time, logarithm of population or number, and there you notice that the linear part essentially is representing the log phase, whereas if you arithmetic plot, if you do, you will get the J-shaped curve which is shown on the right part of the same figure. Is essentially representative of what we people call as ecological pyramid. When different populations live together, we call it a community living, and people, ecologists have noticed that in a community containing different types of individuals, some are called primary producers, some are called consumers, and some are in the last phase of it, another group of organisms come, tertiary consumers. Now one can study what is the relationship between the primary producer and the tertiary consumer through the primary and secondary consumers, taking many parameters. One such parameter that is indicated here in the form of a pyramid is that you have the widest base when you talk of number of organisms in the so-called primary producer category. When we say primary producer, we are referring to green plants who are capable of photosynthesis. And then above this, as you see the numbers, these are actual numbers from measured values. It almost becomes from 5 lakhs or 5,842,000, it becomes 7,08,000, which simply means that out of 580 lakhs which are representing the primary producers, about 7 lakhs represent the primary consumer. So you are seeing almost less than 10% here. That means the numbers decrease. And then if you look at the secondary consumer, like most of the animals, you can see that it hardly represents about 3.5 lakhs, half of the previous. And lastly are the tertiary consumers like vultures and all, and they represent hardly less than 0.1% or 0.01% of the base. What this indicates is, if you take number of individuals as a criterion, you will get a pyramid shape. Similarly, one can talk of energy level or trophic level of each type of organism in the same pyramid, and we get another type of relation. It is also overall pyramid in shape, but the relation among each group is about 10% when we talk of trophic levels. Let us ask a very simple question: what do ecologists study? We cannot answer this question completely within the limited time, but let us see few of these. One of the things that ecologists study is the relationship among the members of different populations who form a food chain. At the bottom you have the primary producers, at the top you have the tertiary or quaternary consumers. We can take any number of parameters and ask how does it vary in quantitatively speaking from the producers to the so-called consumers. Here is one example which talks about either the energy level or percentage of energy transferred to the next trophic level or population size in terms of numbers. Essentially, indicates the relationship among the four categories that we indicated in the earlier slide: the primary producers, the consumers of primary, secondary, tertiary consumers, and the one more category introduced here is the quaternary consumer, which survives or lives on tertiary consumers. Some examples are given. If you take a oak tree as a primary producer, the winter moth lives on this, which is a primary consumer, and then the blue tit survives on this, which we call a secondary consumer, and the tertiary consumer in this food chain is the sparrow or the hawk, and the quaternary consumer, of course, is not listed here. Similarly, if you take grasses as a primary example of a primary producer, you get a slug, the slow worm or a legless lizard, and the adder, it's a type of a snake, and the hedgehog occupying the position of primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary consumers. Similarly, a cotton sedge can be given an example, or an acacia tree can be given, and there are indications of who are the primary consumers, or in some cases, who are the secondary consumers. Essentially deals with an ecological phenomena either naturally occurring or artificially made, and this refers to what we call as succession. That is, in a given habitat, at whatever stage it is, what type of organisms occupy, and if one type of organism occupies it, what other type of organisms will follow suit. Here are two examples. One is a natural example where it starts with glaciers, and when the glaciers retreat, what you see is occupancy of this habitat by mosses and few small herbaceous plants, and then it is followed by Salix antica and other small willows. This is followed by poplars. This is followed by spruce, and then we see the hemlocks and others will follow. That means each of these listed type of organism will come into picture only when the previous one is over. Similarly, if you look at an artificial example, and that is how the West was won. Most of you are aware that many of the pilgrim fathers from England, Ireland, and others went to and occupied so-called America, and in that they started occupying the land and then planted whatever is possible to grow in those available land. And if you look at them, we notice that here also is an artificial so-called succession story. It started with annual plants, then it led to herbaceous perennials, led to shrubs, then led to early successful trees, and then we have late successions of trees. And this is all done artificially by the so-called new settlers, or the Europeans who settled in the East Coast and then spread to the West Coast of USA. Now, this succession chapter of ecology has also been applied with a lot of intelligence to recover or reclaim what we call as ecologically destroyed soils, like mines and all. And what follows here is the work of a Professor C.R. Babu of Delhi University, who ecologically restored many of the degraded soils like Bhatti mines around in the nearby places. And we will here see the actual interview with this great scientist. Deals with a fact of our lives on Earth, a fact which is summarized as biogeochemical cycles, which refers to that certain elements like carbon or nitrogen or some minerals essentially are circulated in a cyclic form from atmosphere through living organisms and back to atmosphere, including soil. So one such example is given of the carbon cycle, which, let us say, to begin with, is carbon dioxide in the air, which is absorbed or fixed by green plants because they are endowed with this pigment chlorophyll, and a process ensues called photosynthesis, as a result of which the plant has made its food and stored as starch, and then so it is called as a primary producer, and then the consumers like animals and others, primary, secondary, tertiary, essentially consume either the plant itself or the other primary consumers, and ultimately degrade this eaten food or dietary constituents in a process like digestion and assimilation. But what results at this digestion and assimilation, which occurs in three stages called primary metabolism or phase 1 metabolism, phase 2 metabolism, and phase 3 metabolism, these element comes back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which most of you are aware that we exhale carbon dioxide as a gas, and therefore this goes back to the atmosphere. Essentially relating a sad story, ecology is essentially a study of interactions of, among organisms. However, when in the case of human beings, we notice that over a period of centuries, these human beings interacting with the physical habitat in the form of many cultural activities or dietary habits or foraging behavior has led to lot of degradation of our environment, and that we call it that pollutants have been released into this, and this slide indicates what are these pollutants which are generated through anthropogenic activity. Many of them like plastics, some of them are automobile emissions like gases like nitric oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and others. How these pollutants have degraded the quality of the environment, which includes the quality of human life. And each of these primary pollutants can also lead to generation of secondary pollutants, as it is listed here. Essentially, this slide therefore tells you that as a result of anthropogenic activity, lot of environment has been spoiled by the release of pollutants. At the end of this lesson, let us summarize what is that we have tried to learn. Ecology tries to know how many organisms are living together in a given habitat at a given time. Ecology studies population dynamics with regard to size, life cycle, status of trophic level, etc. Ecology studies the types of organisms that replace each over a period of time scale, that is called succession in a given habitat. Ecology comes to understand the carrying capacity of a given habitat and consequences when that is exceeded. Degradation of habitat, making it unsuitable to support every form of life, is a major result. Anthropogenic activity has not only resulted in loss of biodiversity but also destruction of habitat. Restoration of degraded habitats, making them once again competent to support life, is a noble activity carried out by restoration ecologists. Thank you for your patience.